Guys, welcome back to your favorite Manhwa recap channel. Today's Manhwa is about a guy who got isekai'd into another world, where he grinded for 100 years maxing out his levels, but got sent straight back to Earth as a max-level swordmaster, where everyone now has a system. Let's move to the story. The author of this channel is suffering from the last stages of ligma. Please leave a like and subscribe to cure this poor soul of his condition.
The story begins with a quote. People who live in heaven don't need to think of hell. We hear a faint noise of someone muttering the same thing repeatedly. It's our protagonist. He seems to be in bad shape, muttering to himself about wanting to see the end while contemplating the quote. The quote was correct, but what if you're the person who went to hell? Do you think about heaven? Yes. The protagonist, who appears malnourished and crazed, sits on a rock, scratching his own flesh as he stares at a system screen asking him if he wants to see the end of this world. Obsessed over the message, he questions why he has to see the end. But no matter how much he thinks, he can't find the answer and slowly collapses to the ground, passing out from exhaustion as the system screen continues to light the place. In the darkness, he hears a voice addressing him as Shin Hyun. The voice asks if his sister is sleeping. Confused, he begins to remember. Yes, his name is Shin Hyun. But who are these people? It's the same dream again. We see Shin sitting in the back seat of a car as his little sister sleeps on his shoulder while their parents drive. But suddenly, a truck appears out of nowhere, hitting their car and sending everyone flying. Yet, it was only Shin who got the ticket to the other world, because when he woke up after that incident, he found himself in a dark cave. How many years ago was that? The only thing given to him in the cave was a book titled Heavenly Martial Harmony Pulse Arts and a messenger telling him to see the end of the world if he wanted to return to his own world. He opens the book, and a purple aura emanates from it, lighting up the cave. Is it really possible? Can he really return to his family? Time is not on his side, and whatever he has to do it quickly. Time passes, and he finally finishes the book. A notification window pops up in front of him, congratulating him for completing the tutorial. Shin, exhausted on the ground, stares at the screen in wonder. Relief floods his face as he cries with joy. Finally, it's done, and he can return to see his family. He walks through the brightly lit gateway, but upon reaching the other side, he immediately falls to his knees in shock. What he sees is not Earth. It's a completely different world, the martial world. Finally, it dawns on him. Everything he went through in the cave with the book was only the tutorial, and this was the true beginning. Shin, now angry and frustrated, slams the ground, cursing whoever did this to him and questioning why they are torturing him like this. After 10 years of struggle in that cave. Now this? What is he supposed to do? Suddenly, a voice is heard calling out to him, commenting on Shin's odd attire. Ignoring the man's question, he tells Shin that his family is starving, and with a deranged look, he brandishes a machete, asking Shin's permission to carve flesh from his body for his family to eat. As the man approaches, Shin, panicked, acts instinctively. The bloody machete falls to the ground, and Shin sits beside the man's lifeless body, scared. As the adrenaline fades, the gravity of the situation hits him. He has killed a man. His thoughts spiral as he tries to justify it as self-defense and wonders what he should do now that he is a murderer. But before he's completely lost, a system notification appears, informing him that his external arts level has increased. Surprised, Shin pieces it together. He just killed someone and his level went up. This could only mean one thing. He begins to laugh, his face pale as he processes what this means for him. He instinctively knows what he has to do next. The heavenly martial arts and the levels, everything becomes clear. He needs to reach the max level, and for that, blood must be spilled. In the present day, we see a long-haired man demanding someone's identity. A nearby man calls out, addressing the figure on the ground as the demonic sect leader. Shin Hyun, now all grown up, stands there with his sword pointed at the sect leader, asking which generation the leader belongs to. Addressing Shin as the all-ending sword emperor, the sect leader trembles in fear, while Shin assumes that this man is of the 8th generation since he has already killed the 6th and 7th. With a smile, Shin looks around at the fallen men, commending them for coming to greet him every decade without fail. A blue aura emerges from Shin's blade, flying toward the sect leader and severing his head in one blow. Seeing their leader fall, one of the sect members charges at Shin in anger, calling him a bastard. Shin casually dodges the attack, pointing out the hypocrisy of the sect calling him names while they belong to the demonic sect. He grabs the lackey's face, pulling him close as blue aura emanates from his hand. Shin commends the man's courage while blood rushes uncontrollably through the sect member's body, bulging his veins. A strong pulse bursts from Shin's hand, and he holds on to the man with a dark grin. Instantly, everything subsides, and Shin tells the man to go far away and learn a demonic art that can at least entertain him next time. Declaring him the next generation of the demonic sect, Shin leaves the carnage, while the sect member stands in shock, watching him leave. Sometime later, in the forest, Shin throws his sword to the ground, sitting beside a tree, disappointed by how weak the new sect leader was. That was his only enjoyment, and it was beginning to grow dull. He considers creating a chaos sect filled with experts he can fight. Looking up at the night sky, he reflects on his past. It has been 140 years, so long that he can hardly remember his family's faces, and because of this, he's lost the drive to reach his goal of seeing the end of the world. Heaven feels non-existent, and he is perpetually trapped in this hellish cycle. Sorrow creeps across his face as he decides that he has had enough and that it is time to end it all. But just as hope is lost, the system intervenes. Shin is taken aback by a sudden notification. Both his external and internal martial arts levels are now maxed. Final level unlocked. Celestial emergence is now activating. You are now returning to Earth. Reading these words, Shin is speechless. He laughs, wondering if he appears pitiful for wanting to end it all or if the system is mocking him. A blue aura surrounds him, lifting him off the ground. He contemplates whether this strange aura that gives him strength could help him transcend worldly desires. Memories of his family flash in his mind, flooding him with emotion. So much time has passed that his family may already be dead, but one goal remains: revenge against the one who did this to him. The system screen appears with a question asking if he wants to return to his original world. Without hesitation, he accepts, and the blue aura envelopes him. Only one thought remains: to kill the one responsible for his suffering. The orb of energy grows with his rage, consuming everything nearby before rising to the sky in a brilliant light. After 140 years away, he is finally going home, to whatever remains of it. We return to Earth, sometime after Shin's accident all those years ago. An angel addresses humanity, urging them to evolve so they can fight the nightmare about to enter the world. As a green portal opens, revealing countless monstrous eyes, the angel blesses the people, asking them to use their gifts wisely. Meanwhile, a man bound in chains laughs, reveling in the knowledge that everything has finally begun, as he challenges Shin Hyun to come and face him. We move to 2025 Korea in the Crimson Wolf dungeon. We see a girl fighting as she is about to unleash an arrow filled with the blue stuff onto a horde of monsters chasing a guy. One of the monsters, which looked like a wolf with 4 eyes, lunged at the man when the girl shot the arrow at it using her power shot ability. The arrow flew through, severing the monster in half as the guy stood there stunned. Amazed by her skill, he called out to the girl, calling her Cha-eun Seol. She is our boy's sister. Eun jumped near the man, thankful she was able to reach there on time, and asked him to begin the evacuation process. The man, still awestruck by her, continued to thank her when a monster that was left alive jumped him from behind, tearing him apart in half. Horrified by the sight, Eun called out to the man, but it was too late. He lies motionless on the ground, while more monsters swarm in, surrounding them from all sides as the men, mostly wounded, lie there helpless. Eun was now feeling the heat. Her MP is almost depleted, and the monsters showed no sign of stopping. At this rate, they would get completely overrun. As she thought about a plan, suddenly one of the guys just up and bolted out of there, causing the monsters to come toward Un. Cursing the coward, Un took her bow to fight the incoming monsters. The coward, who was running at light speed, cursed his decision to party up with the weaklings, thinking that if he stayed there any longer, he would also end up as monster snack just like the others. A bright portal appeared before him, possibly the exit from the place. But before he could jump in, a blue arrow flew from behind, landing right in front of the coward, startling him. It was Un. She was fuming with anger as blue aura emanated from her body as she walked closer. She confronted the coward, asking where he was running off to in a hurry. Spooked by her appearance, the coward addressed team leader Cha with fear, calling it a very big misunderstanding and asking her to calm down. Not falling for it, Un grabbed the guy by the collar. She screamed at him for disobeying orders and going on an all-out attack. Now, because of his useless ass, their entire team was dead. Tears flowed from Un's eyes as she kept shouting at the coward. Frustrated by her words, the guy shouted back, telling her that he did all he could and it was too early for him to die. Hearing his words, she was reminded of what a piece of trash he was. She turned around to leave, asking him to just run away to his father, telling him that his father would roast him alive after hearing what he did there when they get back to Daybreak. Sudden anger and terror crept onto the man's face, and as Un was about to leave the area, the man came from behind, activating his rock smash ability and landing a powerful punch straight to her stomach, throwing her away. Un hit a tree and slumped to the ground as the man approached her, telling her that she had crossed the line. Grabbing her hair, the man asked how trash like her had the guts to talk in front of him, asking her if all the praise she received caused her to think of herself as someone great. With anger and jealousy in his eyes, he looked at the disoriented Un as he narrated the events that happened there, making it so that it was all her fault, causing her entire team to die for her greed. Calling it a likely scenario, the man lifted his hands as red aura flowed from them. Thanking Un for her efforts, the coward lifted his fist as he charged for another punch. But before he could do that, the sky filled with clouds, and lightning came from the center, striking right behind the man and startling him. As the debris cleared, we see the silhouette of a man standing in the middle of the impact. It is our boy Shin. He observed the surroundings as the system notified him of his arrival back to Earth. Hearing the system, Shin burst into laughter, accusing the system of having a nasty sense of humor for giving a return ticket to Earth as a reward for reaching max level. This laugh was not of joy. Our boy, taking a U-turn in emotions, became dead serious and with a determined voice, vowed again to kill the system and whoever is behind it. Breaking the moment, the cocky idiot from the sidelines shouted at Shin for acting so cocky, talking about killing right after teleporting out of nowhere. Looking at the lightning, he asked if Shin was a sorcerer. The idiot kept pressing Shin to reveal his affiliations as Shin walked past him, giving him no time of his day. As the idiot stood there annoyed that Shin ignored him, Shin looked at the girl lying on the ground, remarking that she was about to die due to her injuries. Suddenly his expression changed. He kneeled down towards the girl as the idiot stood on the sidelines, cursing him for ruining his plans. Now that Shin had seen the idiot along with Un, he couldn't let Shin go. Clutching his fist, infusing it with his mana, the idiot stood ready to face him. Meanwhile, Shin, looking at Un, spots a necklace that sparks some of his memories. The idiot kept yapping on the side about Shin leaving and finally decided it was a good idea to attack him and leapt into the air, ready to deal a powerful blow. Suddenly a blue aura surged, nullifying his attack and pushing him back. In the middle of the aura stood Shin menacingly while the guy stood there marveling at the strength. Shin slowly stepped forward, with each step leaving a hole on the ground. The man stood stunned, sweat trickling down his face. Shin, blaming himself for not recognizing, turned to the man and introduced himself as the all-ending sword emperor, Cha Shin-hyun. With the blink of an eye, he jumped right in front of the man, telling him the information was worthless to him because his manhwa was about to be discontinued. The bright light from his finger grew big as it blasted into a powerful energy beam shooting forward, obliterating everything in its path. As the dust cleared, Shin stood there in front of a now headless corpse of the man. He turned around to face Eun, now realizing that she was his long-lost sister. Back in the past, we see a younger Eun Seol bawling her eyes out while holding a teddy bear. Her parents threatened to leave her behind if she didn't stop crying. The mother insisted that she drop her stubbornness since it was getting dark. Shin approached her and, with a sweet tone, asked if she really loved the amusement park that much. As Eun stared at Shin, he asked her to come with them since Mom and Dad were getting angry. Clutching the bear tightly, Eun looked down, expressing her sadness about not being able to spend more time with him since he was soon going to college to study. Patting her head, Shin reassured her that he would often drop by to see her and promised to take her to the amusement park the next time he visited. Hearing that, she became happy and hopped onto Shin's back, asking him for a piggyback ride to the car. He agreed, saying he would give her the piggyback ride since soon she would get too heavy for it. It was happy times, but it didn't last for long. Thinking back, Eun blamed herself for being too stubborn. If she had decided to leave a little earlier and not beg to go to the amusement park, her parents would still be alive, and her brother, who disappeared then, would still be with her. In the present, Shin is healing Eun with his powers. Jolting awake, Eun sat up, still groaning from pain. Shin warned her to take it easy since she still had some recovery left to do. Confused and in pain, Eun turned to Shin, asking who he was. Not blaming her for not recognizing him, he extended his hand, touching Eun and remarking how she had grown up, so he couldn't give her piggyback rides anymore. Clutching her hands, Shin looked at her with a sad expression. Hearing this, memories flowed into her mind of the time when her big brother gave her a necklace as a present to stay strong always. Finally recognizing him, Eun's eyes filled with tears as she cursed Shin, asking where he was all this time. Hugging her tightly, Shin consoled her, telling her that it was all okay now. But suddenly, she remembered something and pushed Shin aside, checking what happened to the coward. Shin nonchalantly looked behind him, telling her that the person who attacked her was dead as the burnt body lay in the crater. Panicked, Eun asked if he was the one who killed him, to which Shin agreed. Clutching his hands, Eun yanked Shin, telling him that they had to run away from there this instant. We moved to their home in an apartment building. Shin looked around the house, marveling at how it looked just the same as when he left the place, while Eun sat on the couch all serious. She told Shin that director Seo Kang-jin would come looking for them any moment. Confused, he asked who that was. He is the director of Daybreak and also the father of Jung-hyun, the idiot. He's a former gang member known for his violent ways and one of the 11 superior hunters in Korea. Looking at the time on her phone, Eun commented that the reporting time had passed while she was unconscious and said that he must have already found out about his son's death. And because she is the only survivor, she would be the prime suspect in his murder. Addressing her concerns, Shin brushed his hair and, with a smile, proposed to end Seo Kang-jin so that all problems would be solved. Hearing this, Eun pinched his cheeks as Shin assured her that the all-ending Sword Emperor would take care of her problems. Sighing, Eun stood back and explained the situation to him. Kang-jin was level 50, which was far above any ordinary person, and that's why he made it to the position of director. Looking at Shin, Eun's face turned red in annoyance as she asked what his deal was, giving himself such a corny nickname, and accused him of being in his emo phase right after meeting her after all these years. She seemed to be more upset about this than about Kang-jin. Grabbing her hair in frustration, she asked him if he had any idea what she went through after their parents died, and Shin disappeared after that accident. Looking at Shin with concern, She asked where he was all this time. Turning around, Shin looked at their family portrait, processing their parents' death. Shifting his attention back to Un, he told her that he was stuck in Murim all this time, saying it was a long story to explain, and changed the topic, asking her to fill him in on everything that happened while he was away. He asked about the hunters and the hunter guilds and about the existence of levels on Earth, just like in Murim. Un listened to him closely and asked him for time to process all the information she just received. Putting this topic aside for another time, she bolted out the door, telling him that she was going to take care of the business at hand first. She was going directly to Daybreak. As she left, asking him to stay in the house, he looked around the place, marveling at how everything was exactly the same as from his childhood. Thinking of Un, he noted how mature she had become, surviving on her own all these years, fending for herself. Leaving the room, Shin decided that he had to make up for all the missing years by fulfilling the brotherly duties he had to do. And the first step to that was finding that man. Just as the thought crossed his mind, several men stood silently outside, while one man manifested a magic circle in his hand, blasting down the door to their apartment. Seeing Shin stand there at the entrance, Kang Jin shouted, asking where Un was. Taken aback by the rude introduction, Shin was slightly annoyed. Standing in front of him was Kang Jin, who had come there to get revenge for his son. Back at the Daybreak headquarters, Un stood outside the building, tired from running straight there non-stop. She wondered if Kang Jin had already caught up and thought about what she would do if she got arrested the moment she walked into the building. She had to find someone to ask for help. But who? A voice came from behind, calling Un by her name. It was Daybreak Vice Guild Manager Lee Jihayi. She asked why Un was there at that time, since she was supposed to be at the raid with Seo Jung, asking if anything went wrong. Un stood in front of her, analyzing her next move. Jihayi was one of the 4 strongest hunters in Korea, known for her strength and righteousness. But it was difficult to gauge what was going on behind that smile of hers. Should she take a gamble and tell her everything? It didn't matter since that was her only choice at the moment. She clenched her fists and started to explain everything to her. In the apartment, Kang Jin and Shin were in a face-off. Annoyed by the rude entry, Shin blamed Kang for not having any manners for breaking the door down at a stranger's house. Kang Jin's lackey, angry after hearing this, stepped forward to fight Shin but was held back by Kang. With a cold look, Kang asked Shin to reveal the whereabouts of Un. Brushing off his question, Shin told him that if he was looking for the man who killed his son, that man was standing right in front of him. Kang's face twisted in a fit of rage after hearing this. He roared as a tremendous amount of mana surged around him. Back at the conversation between Un and Jihayi, she expressed interest in meeting her brother, while here Shin, excited for the fight, changed into a fighting stance as Kang leapt at him with his giant sword. A red aura struck the ground as Kang slammed his giant sword down. Dodging the blade by leaping into the air, Shin wondered about the unique energy flowing through Kang's sword. It seemed similar to blade chi or blade aura, yet the source of the power felt different. Shin marveled at the strength of the hunters Un had mentioned, recalling Kang's son using the same type of power. A slight smile appeared on his face as Shin thought about investigating more into this mysterious power. Meanwhile, Kang stood on the ground, seething with rage as his sword glowed red. With swift movements, Kang charged toward Shin, who remained ready to defend. A massive shockwave erupted as their weapons clashed. When the dust cleared, Shin stood there uninjured, acknowledging the power behind Kang's attack. Seeing that Shin had blocked his move with bare hands, Kang stood frozen, a mix of terror and anger in his eyes. Shin's hand, now gripping Kang's blade, had veins bulging from the sheer strength of the clash. Drunk on the thrill of the fight, Shin looked at Kang, his eyes glowing blue, and asked if it was true that there were 10 more people like him in Korea. Kang's lackeys, who had been waiting on the sidelines, leaped into the air to support their director, calling out to him. But they were mere nuisances to Shin, who swatted them aside without breaking a sweat, staying focused on the fight. Catching him off guard, a fireball hit him square in the face, launched by the third man who had come with Kong. As the flames faded, the attacker reveled in his perceived success. Seizing this chance, another man charged at Shin with his sword drawn. But before he could land a blow, Shin appeared before him, clutching the blade in his hand and shattering it with a slight squeeze. Shin's eyes lit up with a bright blue glow, a sinister grin spreading across his face. The man's eyes widened in shock as Shin unleashed his true power, sending a surge of energy that pushed everyone away, terrifying them all. Wiping off the dust from his robes like the jigachad he is, Shin thought about Un's words. It had only been 14 years since he had disappeared, but the men standing before him were as strong as zeniths. Reaching such a level requires countless experiences, technique, and natural talent. How did modern humanity catch up to the Murim in just 14 years? And not only that, each generation of warriors has only a handful of ascendants. The situation was almost laughable to him. But, even after all this, reaching the level of the strongest 10 still demanded far more. Smiling at the absurdity, Shin acknowledged the chaos he had introduced to the hierarchy of this land. The next logical step was to remake it, destroying everyone and standing above all. Meanwhile, on the road, Un was driving Jihayi to her home. She was still puzzled as to why Jihayi had suddenly asked to meet her brother. Jihayi had always been hard to read, but now it was nearly impossible. However, the offer Jihayi had given Un, to help her cover up everything related to the director, was too tempting to refuse. Un wasn't the only one deep in thought. Jihayi was considering how to handle the situation, not wanting to make Shin her enemy. Turning to Un, Jihayi asked her about the time Shin had disappeared. Her eyes widened in shock upon hearing that Shin had spent nearly 14 years in Murim. Seeming to recognize the place, Jihayi calculated that Shin had actually spent 140 years there, and she feared the power he had gained from that long time in Murim. Wanting to know more about Shin, Jihayi asked Un to describe what kind of person her brother was. Reminiscing about the past, Un described Shin as kind, gentle, and exceptionally intelligent. He had been admitted to the most prestigious university in Korea without the help of tutors or extra lessons. But above all, he was relentless. Once he set his sights on something, he would stop at nothing to achieve it. Back at the apartment, Shin pointed at the mage who had hit him, asking to see more of such attacks since he had never encountered them in Murim. With a smile, he invited the mage to use his funky energy, again, when the sword-wielding lackey rudely interrupted him. Shin swatted the man away with a backhanded slap, sending him flying as blood gushed from his face. The mage, now trembling, sent a wave of ice magic toward Shin. But Shin, unimpressed, stood still, knowing these tricks were common in Murim. Deciding to show the mage true ice magic, Shin conjured multiple giant ice dragons, freezing the mage solid in seconds. Seeing the gap in their strength, the swordsman tried to flee but was stopped by a barrier surrounding the entire room. Kong, witnessing all this, was paralyzed by fear, while Shin mocked him, remarking on the lack of trust between gang members. Kong was completely confused now, wondering what kind of person Shin was. He questioned if Shin might be a mage, judging by the ice attack, but dismissed the thought. No mage could block his attacks. Suddenly, Kong noticed something else. Despite the intense fighting, the room was unscathed. Is it because of the barrier Shin put up? Frustrated, Kong asked if Shin had been prepared for their arrival all along. Folding his arms, Shin replied that he had simply layered the room with a shield to prevent these peasants from ruining his beautiful home. Then, with a smirk, he revealed that the moment Kang's group entered the apartment, they had already stepped into his domain expansion. Realizing his efforts had failed, Kong made one final attempt, activating his berserker skill in hopes of taking Shin down with him. Kang's aura surged uncontrollably, Yet Shin, calm as ever, commented on the irony of someone like Kong calling him a monster and asked if Kong was trying to drag him to the grave. Lost in rage, Kong blindly charged, swinging his sword with wild intensity. As Shin dodged the frenzied attacks, he commented on the refined technique Kong still displayed, despite his lost mind. Picking up a broken blade from the ground, Shin infused it with his aura and, in one swift motion, severed Kang's head. As Kang's body fell, Shin stood there, blood-streaked, telling Kong to take it as an honor to be killed by the all-ending Sword Emperor. Later, Un and Jihayi arrived at the apartment. Inside, they found Shin calmly cleaning the blood from the floor, chiding Un for being late. Responding to Un's concern about what had happened, Shin casually said they had just held a housewarming party. Unsatisfied, Un reminded him of his promise not to cause more problems as a faint blue aura began to surround her. Brushing off her concerns, Shin turned his attention to Jihayi, who was silently observing with a slight smile. Instantly, he sensed her overwhelming energy, the heavenly harmonic pulsars. Suddenly, Jihayi's voice entered Shin's mind through telepathy, greeting him, which caught him by surprise. With a knowing smile, she asked Shin if he thought he was the only person to visit Murim. Hearing this, Shin stood frozen, a bead of sweat trickling down his face. The day passed. It is now morning. Sun rays shine on the apartment building, breaching the windows and into the room where Un is sleeping. Un wakes up from her dream, sweating as though she was having her worst nightmare. Frantically getting up from the bed, she looks around, calling out to her brother, concern filling her eyes. The sound of Shin is heard from behind, asking why she is up so early, causing Un to turn around eagerly. We see Shin, who now looks like a regular guy from the 21st century streets, quite different from his ancient cool look. With a smile, he asks Un if she thought he would disappear again. Her concerns fading upon seeing Shin, she throws the question back at him, asking what he's doing up so early. But just before he could respond, Shin's phone rang. Looking at it, he immediately excused himself, walking out of the apartment in a hurry to meet someone, leaving Un puzzled. It has been a week since Shin returned to Earth. That day, Jihayi just stared at Shin for a while and left without saying anything. Afterward, some men in black came to the house, taking care of the director's and his lackey's corpses, and the next day, the news reported Seo Junghyun's death and that Seo Kongjin had suddenly retired and gone missing. Jihayi kept her word, and as the person responsible for the Crimson Wolf raid and the sole survivor, Un received an extended disciplinary sentence from the guild. Today, Jihayi has called Shin. Looking out of the window, Un's face is again filled with concern as she watches Shin get in the car to meet Hai, telling him to stay safe on the way. We move to a room where Hai is waiting for Shin at a table. She picks up her cup of tea and takes a sip as Shin comments on her relaxed nature. Approaching the table, Shin thanked her for the 24-hour surveillance he's experiencing now in a sarcastic tone. Putting her cup down, she calls it more of a protection than surveillance. Shin just agrees as he sits down on the other end of the table. Taking a sip of his own tea, Shin is caught off guard by the familiar taste. With a smile, Hai clarifies that it is Junshan Injin tea and tells him she used to stop in the Honam region to drink it when she was in Murim. Seeing her jump directly to the topic, Shin gets excited to talk about it. Putting her hand on her teacup, she begins to explain. There are currently 3 Murim returnees, including Park Tae-hoon, who is the master of Twilight. Twilight, along with Daybreak, are the 2 guilds that hold most of the power in the Korean Hunter Association. Even though she wasn't able to speak with him after her return, Hai explains that she has found some consistencies in their stories. Like Shin, she also one day woke up in a cave with a book containing the martial harmonic pulsars. And when she stepped outside the cave, she was in the world of Murim. This was what all 3 of them experienced. Memories flash back to Shin about the time he first entered Murim and the quest the system gave him to see the ends of that world. As Shin confirms Hai's assessment, she continues, explaining that after her return, the two worlds somehow merged. She doubts if it was a blessing or curse that sent them to Murim before the incident. But one thing is sure, the events are connected. Looking at Shin, who is listening intently, Hai asks what he knows about hunters and dungeons. 14 years ago, after the goddess's prophecy, dungeons, monsters, and hunters appeared. The concepts of classes and skills aren't too different from those in the MMORPGs he played as a kid. Getting to the serious questions, Shin asks Hai how they returned to their world, and Hai, with an expressionless face, tells him that they came back only after they had died in Murim, eagerly asking if it was the same for him as well. Hearing this, Shin's irritation peaks as he curses the system. Understanding the meaning behind, seeing the ends of the world, now thinking about the incident, the only way to find out why he was sent to Murim is the goddess who appeared on Earth. Since the reward for reaching max level in Murim was to return to Earth, there must be an equally amazing reward for reaching max level on Earth too. Thinking this, Shin's face twists into a grin. Breaking the cup he's holding, he warns the goddess to have a fitting reward if she wants to save face as an angel. Seeing Shin suddenly act like this, Hai's face breaks into a cold sweat. Quickly changing the topic, Shin turns to Hai, asking her why she reached out to him in the first place. Relieved that Shin is now out of his psycho phase, Hai asks him to take a walk with her. Walking through the garden, Hai explains that the Daybreak and Twilight guilds are now at a stalemate, which could turn into a war at any moment now that the director of Daybreak is dead. Turning to Shin, Hai asks him to take responsibility for the baby guild by joining Daybreak. She promises him a high position with fame and wealth beyond his imagination, calling it the offer of the century. Hands on his head, Shin looks disinterested, telling her that he refuses to join the guild. When Hai asks for clarity, Shin tells her that he's a guy who does things alone, and it doesn't make sense to work for someone weaker than him. Slightly annoyed by his claim, Hai challenges Shin to a fight to determine who is stronger, saying that if he loses, he will work under her in Daybreak. She explains that even though Shin spent almost 140 years in Murim, spending longer doesn't necessarily mean he's stronger. Intrigued by her proposal, Shin agrees, telling her that even if one were to spend 300 years in Murim, they wouldn't be a match for him. Commenting on his confidence, Hai shifts into a fighting stance, conjuring a pink energy orb in her hand and shooting it towards Shin with great force. The orb flies halfway before soaring up and expanding, creating a closed space around them. Sensing his energy weakening, Shin calculates the radius of the zone to be around 50 meters. The orb completely covers them, transforming the space into another dimension, making it appear as though they just disappeared from there. Moving towards Shin, Hai tells him how she was called the Bloodied Plum Blossom back in Murim, because she never failed an assassination. Hearing that she was an assassin, Shin compares the situation to fighting off a killer with his arms and legs tied. Wasting no time, Hai pulls out 2 crimson blades from thin air, explaining that the condition to exit this space is to either beat her or die trying. Hearing this, Shin laughs at her uncivil death threat in broad daylight, noting that there's more to the barrier than meets the eye. Hai appears directly in front of Shin, her blade pressed to his throat as she smiles, commenting on Shin's keen observation. She swung her blade, sending a wave of purple aura toward Shin's neck. He sidestepped effortlessly as Hai stepped back, readying herself for the next strike. She leapt forward, launching relentless blows, but Shin blocked everyone with ease. The battle intensified as Hai used her special ability to send 2 powerful slashes, forcing Shin to leap back and land on his feet. Her signature opening move featured 2 daggers, one held in a reverse grip, the style of the Shadow King, Murim's greatest assassin. This was the Moonlight Sanguine Path. Noticing Shin recognized her technique, Hai commended his knowledge. Shin smiled, recalling a time he had fought someone claiming to be the Shadow King's successor. Back then, he was inexperienced and killed the man with a single blow. Hearing this, Jihayi began to reconsider her choices up to now. Standing with his hands in his pockets, Shin offered her 3 attempts to strike him. If she could best him in even one, he'd join the Daybreak Guild, and the last attack counted as her first try. Jihayi tightened her grip on her sword, determined to succeed in 2 remaining strikes. Changing her stance, she disappeared from Shin's senses, vanishing as if she'd melted into thin air, leaving Shin stunned. Wondering if this was due to a skill, Shin tried to process the situation when waves of powerful energy surged toward him. He dodged as they hit the ceiling of the enclosed barrier, sending debris and residual aura raining down like 1,000 daggers. Extending his hands, Shin released a blue aura, unleashing waves of attacks that destroyed the oncoming daggers before he landed safely on the ground, impressed by Jihayi's skills. But before he could take a moment's rest, Jihayi appeared behind him, sending a deadly slash toward his neck. Anticipating her move, Shin blocked effortlessly, informing her that this counted as her second strike. She had only one left. Jihayi began to feel the pressure as she backed away, standing at a distance and comparing Shin to a Shaolin monk who reached transcendence at the age of 150. Since Shin had lived in Murim even longer, he must be even stronger. Hearing this, Shin agreed indifferently. Aura surged from the ground, breaking it open as Jihayi stood amid the chaos with a smile. She asked if defeating Shin would make her the strongest in Murim. Hearing this absurd statement, Shin burst into laughter, telling her to stop being so full of herself, as Jihayi combined her aura for a final strike. Pouring all her strength into it, Jihayi activated her ultimate skill, Shadow Daggers, unleashing a storm of crimson daggers toward Shin. He watched the attack intently, then summoned his own, Sword Will. A powerful blue light surged from him, effortlessly cutting down every dagger and rushing toward Jihayi, injuring her all over. A massive boulder, lifted by Shin's aura, hurtled toward Jihayi, who stood frozen, as if forcefully held in place. In a last-second move, Shin jumped in, breaking the giant boulder with a single punch, shattering it into pieces. Standing before Jihayi, his fist clenched, Shin informed her she was out of attempts and asked if she'd like to try again. Realizing the sheer gap in their strength, Jihayi admitted defeat as her barrier slowly faded away. As they closed the challenge, Jihayi asked Shin one last thing. Toward the end, she had felt as if she'd come into contact with a higher being. She looked to him, eager for an explanation. Sitting down, Shin praised her strength, telling her it was enough to kill any normal, strongest person under the heavens within her barrier. But our boy is built different. Confused, Jihayi asked Shin to clarify what he meant by normal. Clutching her dagger tightly, she asked him about the true peak of his strength. Brushing off the question, Shin complimented her again, and because he was impressed, he offered to lend his strength to Daybreak in exchange for resources and information. However, he insisted he would remain an outsider, viewing it as more of an alliance between him and the guild. Seeing no other option, Jihayi asked Shin to promise not to ally with anyone else in return, and Shin agreed. Extending his hand, he gave his word, staking his title as the All-Ending Sword Emperor. Satisfied with the outcome, Jihayi shook Shin's hand, sealing the deal. But before she left, Shin told her to remove the surveillance, warning that if she didn't, some of her men might trip and fall, never to be seen again. Understanding his meaning, Jihayi quickly agreed. Tearing a piece of his shirt, Shin apologized for hurting her and offered it to cover her wounds. Accepting the gesture, Jihayi thanked him for the opportunity to go all out, testing her limits. As she turned to leave, Shin asked why she chose the assassin class above all others. Her expression turned serious as she replied, "Have you ever wanted to kill someone, no matter the cost?" This was a feeling Shin understood all too well. Smiling, he sent her off, saying they'd meet again. Elsewhere, A car waited on a dirt road. Inside, a well-dressed man in the driver's seat checked his watch. When he saw Jihayi approaching, he looked at her with concern, noticing she had used her ultimate move. With a slight smile, Jihayi reminisced about the fight, telling him that even though she had exhausted all her stamina and MP, she couldn't even graze Shin. Thinking about the overwhelming power Shin had shown, a cold sweat broke out on Jihayi's brow as she settled into her seat. As the driver started the car, he asked if she planned to send Shin to the solar festival with Twilight. Sitting in the back, Jihayi stressed that Shin was their only hope and, without him, everything could come crashing down. Back at the apartment, Shin returns with his shirt torn from the last fight. The moment he opens the door, Un comes running, hugging him in relief. Concerned, Shin asks what the problem is, but Un glares at him, her face scarier than any monster he has ever faced. Shouting at him, Un tells him to shut up. Looking down, her face changes into one of worry. She asks Shin not to go anywhere from then on and to stay at the house because she's afraid of him going missing again. Understanding her concern, Shin pats Un on the head, telling her not to worry as he breaks the news of him planning to be a hunter. Finally realizing that everything she had been saying was flying right over his head, Un's face curls up in anger, asking if he has a death wish or something. Going inside, Shin places a cube on the table, calling it the mystic cube given to him by Jihayi. Sitting on the couch with his face covered in bruises, which suddenly appeared for no reason we can think of, he tells Un that the cube is all he needs to become a hunter, according to Jihayi. Un stands there, still angry, calling him stubborn. Lifting the cube, Shin holds it in his hand, marveling at its beauty, when it slowly starts to melt away in his hand, and Shin's face slowly turns lifeless. Turning to Un with a dead expression, as remnants of the cube flow from his arm, Shin asks if Jihayi was ever arrested for fraud. But Un sighs and explains that it's all legit, and that he just has to say status window to see his stats. As Un sits opposite Shin, he shouts, status window, and two different system windows appear before him. The yellow one is his Murim status window, which only he can see, while the other blue one is the hunter window showing his name, class, MP, and HP. Excited to see his stats, Un looks at the window to see what class he was awarded. To her surprise, it shows no class. Her face does a 180, and now, as the happiest person there, she tells Shin that being a hunter isn't for him and asks him to stay at home from then on. Meanwhile, Shin, oblivious to what is happening, sits there confused. Filling him in, Un explains about the classes. Hunters are split into 6 different classes: warrior, shielder, wizard, cleric, archer, and assassin. There are more if you include advanced classes, but these 6 are the fundamental hunter classes. For example, Un's base class is archer, and her advanced class is sniper. Folding her arms, Un explains that a person is born with their class and cannot change it at will. But Shin doesn't have any class, which means he won't be able to get one, making him a generic nobody. As Shin sits there, hopeless, Un explains that the problem with a classless person becoming a hunter is skills. Hunters need EXP to level up, and EXP can only be gained when you fight a monster using skills. Unlike the 6 base classes who start with skills, no-class hunters must purchase skill cubes separately. And the cheapest skill, fist fighting, costs 20 million won, and swordsmanship is 25 million won, hearing which the remaining life in Shin's body drains away. Hunters with classes automatically get skills as they level up, but no-class hunters need to continuously use money to buy new skills. Shifting her gaze to Shin, Un, with an evil grin, asks if he has any money for the skills. Suddenly, An idea pops into Shin's mind. Jihayi could be his funder from now on, so she can probably get him a skill. Though this brings the life back to Shin, Un isn't so happy hearing this. Thinking of the deal Shin made with Jihayi, he thanks his past self for making it, as without it, he would be the one on the streets now. But that isn't the only problem here. The fact that a one-of-a-kind genius like Shin didn't get a class is preposterous, as his ego lies dead 6 feet under. We move to Mount Chayak, also known as the Rabbit Dungeon. It's the Daybreak Guild's tutorial dungeon. A rabbit morphs into a terrifying monster as Un's arrow cooks it into nice roasted meat. Un excitedly turns to Shin, showing her achievement, while Shin asks her to stop making a fuss over a silly rabbit. Picking up the stone dropped by the dead rabbit, Shin asks if this is the Monstone Un was talking about and how much it sells for. She explains that this stone contains vast amounts of energy, so much so that it has replaced every nuclear reactor in the world. Telling Shin to be cautious and not drop his guard, Un picks up another arrow while Shin casually fingerbangs multiple rabbits, one-shotting them. Shin opens the hunter system and notices that no experience is rewarded to him for killing the rabbits with martial arts, thinking to himself that this task is more difficult than he thought. Looking at the swordsman's skill he now has thanks to Jihayi, he wonders if he should have asked for something else. Hearing this, Un accuses Shin of being too greedy, since Jihayi gave him the skill for free on top of letting them use the training dungeon. But Shin is still focused on his skill, which has a low D rank rarity. Un warns Shin about Jihayi, telling him that she isn't one to give things for free, and when the time comes, she'll expect 10 times the value from him. But none of this gets through to Shin as he stares into the distance, serious. Quickly grabbing Un's hands, Shin asks her to move to a better place for monsters. Soon they're standing on top of a cliff, looking down at countless monster rabbits roaming below, leaving Un stunned. Picking up an arrow, Un asks Shin to stay back as this is too much of a threat for a beginner like him. But ignoring her warning, Shin waves goodbye as he jumps down from the cliff, leaving Un frustrated. While falling, Shin thinks about how humiliating it is for the Great Sword Emperor to get a D-rank sword skill and no class. Unsheathing his sword, he releases his powers as he slams onto the ground, sending shockwaves across the field. This stupid joke has to end now. While he stares down the rabbits, Un is screaming her lungs out from the top, scolding Shin for his recklessness. Deciding to deal with Un later, Shin moves forward when several warning windows appear before him, all telling him to swing his sword across the line. This is meant to be a tutorial on how to use a sword. Fed up with the system belittling him, Shin cuts the screen in half as he goes on a rampage, chopping up all the rabbit monsters in the area, releasing his anger at the system that dares to teach the Sword Emperor how to use a sword. As Shin finally calms down, he walks through the field now covered with monstones. Notifications pile up in front of him, annoying Shin as he tries to turn them off. But this time, something is different. Intrigued, Shin opens the notification to see what's inside. The notification bar popped open, displaying Shin's swordsmanship proficiency, now at an A+ level. Satisfied that the system was finally speaking a language he understood, Shin fiddled with the screen, figuring out its functions. Un, standing in the background, was stunned as she asked about all the notifications. Equally puzzled by the sudden increase in level, Shin speculated that it might be a reflection of his own swordsmanship or perhaps just a system error. As Shin continued to explore the interface, Un couldn't believe someone could reach A+ grade proficiency in an instant. Something on the screen caught Shin's eye. Recalling a conversation with Un, he asked her about the time she mentioned gaining experience points simply by using passive skills. As Un confirmed his suspicion, Shin smiled, noticing that the system had now unlocked his origin skill with an A+ rarity, and the proficiency was set to max, cracking his knuckles. Shin commented that it was about time things got easier. Sliding his foot back, Shin charged up his hands for a powerful strike. He launched a punch into the air, creating a massive shockwave. This skill allowed him to use his martial arts to gain experience in his hunter system. Finally, things started to make sense to him. He reasoned that Jihayi and the Twilight Guild leader must have also unlocked origin skills, making them among the strongest hunters. Behind him, Un watched Shin's display of power, stunned by the might of his martial arts. Clutching her bow, she called out to Shin, who turned to see Un standing there with a determined look, asking him to teach her martial arts. After watching him defeat Kong Jin so easily, she was convinced that Shin was stronger than anyone else. Reflecting on a past failed mission, she confessed that unless she grew stronger, she risked seeing the same tragedy repeated, unable to save her comrades. Her eyes welled up as she voiced her regret, looking at Shin with near desperation, pleading for him to teach her. Moving forward, Shin placed a comforting hand on her shoulder and agreed to train her in martial arts. But, since she would be his first disciple, he warned her that the training wouldn't be easy. Relieved, Shin thought that teaching her martial arts was the right choice. He couldn't always be there for her, so she needed the strength to handle dangers on her own. Once she calmed down, Shin turned and suggested they move to the next station. They dashed through the field at high speed, and as they ran, Un asked if he planned to use his warrior skills since he'd now mastered the swordsman skill. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden ambush as several rabbits leapt directly at them from a cliff. To Shin, these level 1 creatures were mere fodder for leveling up. With a powerful punch, he obliterated 2 of them in one blow, explaining that he still hadn't decided on a path as a hunter. He could level up just using martial arts, but he wanted to master special class skills, the same ones that had helped Jihayi advance faster when combined with her Murim abilities. If he could find a skill compatible with his martial arts, it would raise his strength to new heights. Shin leapt into the air toward the monster horde, channeling his aura into his fist for a powerful blow. He could manifest most skills through martial arts, making it unnecessary to learn them separately, yet some, like magic, were challenging to incorporate. Shin sent a shockwave that slammed into the ground, wiping out all the rabbits in the area. Watching the sheer destruction, Un stood there, now worried for the dungeon's safety. Meanwhile, Shin stood smiling, now clear about the path he wanted to take with his hunter system. Sitting down, he casually announced to Un that he intended to become a wizard. Un was taken aback, thinking her brother was absurd. If it were that easy to become a wizard, everyone would be one. Yet, knowing it was pointless to argue, she walked away as Shin celebrated his brilliant idea. Sitting with both systems open in front of him, Shin compared them. It was obvious that there was a vast gap between the two. The Murim system focused on his state, merely monitoring his levels in external and internal arts. Being aware of one's state was useful in martial arts. However, the hunter system offered more variety. It had HP, skills, stamina, and even MP. Its layout was user-friendly, highly detailed, and packed with functions. The two systems were so different that they seemed to have been created by two people with the same abilities but vastly different approaches. The hunter system required fighting monsters to gain experience, with instant rewards that accelerated growth. Although risky, anyone could get stronger as long as they put in the effort. But the Murim way was far more dangerous. It demanded endless sacrifices, time-intensive training, and life-threatening risks, unless a life-changing opportunity arose. Thoughts of the godlike being who created the heavenly harmonic pulse arts crossed Shin's mind. That treasure, so highly sought in Murim, had been in the cave he found all those years ago, a pivotal moment in his life. As he walked alongside Un, he thought about the goddess who had brought the hunter system to Earth. If she had created it, Then the being who sent Shin to Murim must be the god who wrote that book, the heavenly martial deity. A month later, Shin was still leveling up while supporting Jihayi. Now facing a giant, menacing chicken, he wondered how tasty it might be. Standing at level 22, Un's soul was also progressing, learning to channel her internal arts through her body's 365 vessels. Though she had surpassed the ideal age for martial arts training, she'd found ways to overcome the obstacles. Sitting on the ground, Un asked Shin why he had called her there. Patting her back with a pleasant smile, Shin told her to take it easy and advised her to spit if she felt any blood coming up, leaving Un terrified. By manipulating her ki, Shin could forcibly bring out her internal arts, though her screams echoed through the area. Despite the toll on his health, Un finally leveled up, although it cost him a scolding afterward. Elsewhere, in a quiet room, a figure holding a teacup awaited Shin. It was Jihayi. Noticing Shin's well-being, she greeted him, asking if they could finally begin their arrangement. Confused, Shin asked what she meant by this arrangement. Since it had been a while since her last call, he asked if she had anything specific in mind, sipping his tea. Leaning across the table, Jihayi smiled at him and asked him to go on a date with her. Shin's eyes widened in shock upon hearing Jihayi ask him out on a date. This was something new for him. In all his 140 years, the only relationship he'd had was with his right hand. But he had to play it cool. Folding his arms, Shin told Hai he wasn't interested, though Hai persisted in trying to convince him. Standing up, Hai mentioned the appearance of a new dungeon with a difficulty level of 10. It would typically require a party of level 40 or higher to enter safely. But with Shin by her side, it would be a breeze. Intrigued, Shin asked why she wanted only the two of them to go into such a dangerous dungeon alone. Hai turned serious, explaining that while crowd control was one reason, the primary goal was to help Shin grow as quickly as possible as a hunter. Grinning while holding his tea bowl, Shin teased her, asking if she was actually proposing to take him on a bus ride. Feeling Shin's clumsy attempt at flirtation, Hai told him to stop acting like a 1,000-year-old virgin, to which Shin chuckled in agreement. But Shin couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He asked Hai why she was helping him so much despite their formal agreement. Sensing it was as good a time as any, Hai explained the upcoming solar festival, an annual event held between the Daybreak and Twilight guilds to decide the strongest guild in the Republic of Korea. Although intended as a friendly sparring contest to foster unity, in reality, it was where the guilds measured each other's strength and strategized on how and when they might overpower one another. She continued, explaining that although these skirmishes typically occurred in dungeons and remained hidden from the public, the two guilds had been shedding blood over dungeon ownership, and an all-out war was imminent. Confused, Shin asked why they were fighting such an extreme battle over dungeon ownership. Keeping her serious expression, Hai poured more tea and explained that the root of the issue was Park Tae-hoon. Though Tae-hoon hadn't always been so power-hungry, he suddenly became obsessed, claiming he needed to follow the will of the heavenly martial deity. Hearing her mention the deity, Shin leaped up in shock, pressing Hai for any information on the deity's whereabouts and her relationship with Tae-hoon. Surprised by Shin's reaction, Hai calmed him, saying she only knew that Tae-hoon once received a mysterious message through his status window. Since others couldn't view a person's status window, there was no way to verify it. As Shin sat in contemplation, Hai shared her concern over Tae-hoon's sudden hostility toward her and her guild, despite their former friendship in Murim. A hint of sadness crossed her face as she thought about their past. Determined, Hai then asked Shin to participate in the solar festival as an ally of the Daybreak Guild. Leaving the cafe, they headed to the car waiting outside. Hai explained the serious situation to Shin, stating that if news of the recent dungeon capture by Twilight leaked, it could mean the end for Daybreak. At this critical moment, she also mentioned that Kang Jin had recently disappeared in secret. Acknowledging the severity, Shin still didn't quite understand why she was intent on grooming him as a hunter. Irritated that he still didn't get it, Jihayi explained that the festival would be broadcast in real time, with foreign correspondents covering it. She pointedly asked if he planned to reveal his martial arts to the world. Proving his experience in Murim was one thing, but demonstrating his true power would attract the attention of hunters worldwide. Jihayi pressed him, asking if he was prepared to face the World Hunter Association. His hesitation was answer enough. Taking his silence as consent, she thanked him for accepting the offer, while a driver handed over a suitcase from the other seat. Opening it, Jihayi offered Shin 6 wizard skills and a top-tier mage and sorcerer skill as payment. Seeing these rewards, Shin began to think helping Daybreak might be worth it, especially since he'd have to confront Tae-hoon eventually. But he hadn't expected the paperwork Jihayi dumped on him afterward, legally binding his support to Daybreak. These documents detailed the items he received and guaranteed payments. Alongside them was a guild application form. Holding it up, Shin asked what it was for. Jihayi explained that appearing at the Solar Festival as a freelance hunter was complicated and dealing with sponsors would be a hassle. Pointing to the skills, she asked if he knew their value and told him to shut up and sign if he understood her meaning. Realizing he'd been outmaneuvered, Shin reluctantly filled in the form, writing Martial Apex as his guild name. Days passed as they visited the dungeon daily. One day, Shin and Jihayi stood in a valley surrounded by monsters in the sky. Jihayi cautioned him to stay alert, as the monsters, though weak individually, packed a punch in large numbers. Shin's hands glowed with blue energy as he surveyed the 3,000 enemies around them, while Jihayi felt nervous. For Shin, the more targets, the better. Extending his hand, Shin transformed the energy into a spear, which he aimed at the monsters. With immense power, he threw it, bringing down the horde in one hit. Stunned by his sheer strength, Jihayi marveled at how quickly he'd mastered a skill he'd just learned hours before. Brushing it off, Shin explained that although magic and martial arts were different, they shared similar principles, making them easy to pick up. Concerned, Jihayi advised him not to push himself too far too soon, as he could drain all his mana unexpectedly. Smirking, Shin declared himself the apex magician, Cha Shin Hyun, and insisted he had nothing to worry about. Curious, Shin asked if all dungeon monsters were typically of the same type, to which Jihayi confirmed. This sparked concern on Shin's face. Jihayi explained that ever since the first dungeon appeared, no dungeon had ever contained multiple types of monsters. Suddenly, a massive claw tore through a flying creature, sending it crashing to the ground. A colossal dragon landed, raising its wings while the smaller monsters, supposed to be the dungeon mobs, lay lifeless around it. Same time, somewhere in the Twilight Guild, we see Park Tae-hoon fishing by a pond when a man in glasses addresses Tae-hoon as master. This well-dressed man is Kim Cheol-ho, Tae-hoon's lackey. He informs Tae-hoon that Jihayi of the Daybreak Guild has been acting suspiciously over the past few days, telling him how Jihayi is supporting a complete newbie who hasn't even registered with the association, and about their frequent quests to dungeons together, all while Tae-hoon continues his fishing. Throwing a plate of fish food into the pond filled with koi fish, he asks the butler to elaborate. The butler, holding a piece of paper, explains the identity of the newbie as the brother of Daybreak team leader Eun Seol, Cha Shin Hyun, further explaining about Shin's disappearance 14 years ago and his sudden comeback. He also notes the timing of Shin's reappearance with the disappearance of the Daybreak leader, whom Shin had clashed with before. Cutting him off, Tae-hoon asks about the disappearance, wanting to know where Shin had been for 14 years. Frantically searching through his papers, the butler reveals that, despite all efforts, the investigation team couldn't determine Shin's whereabouts. But they did find that the former leader of Daybreak didn't just retire. He went missing and was last seen at Shin's house prior to the incident. Lifting his straw hat, Tae-hoon places it down while declaring that Kang Jin is already dead. The butler stands there in surprise, unable to believe Kong could be dead. Tae-hoon confirms it, eager to meet the mysterious newcomer. Judging from what he's heard, it's almost certain that Shin is from Murim. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, our boy is popping off, blasting ice magic with one hand and fire magic with the other, completely decimating the local wildlife and likely placing himself at the top of PETA's watch list. Cracking his knuckles, Shin exclaims how much fun the whole magic thing is compared to shooting gale palms. Waking him up from his power trip, Hai comments on how Shin's mana doesn't seem like it's going to drain anytime soon, and that if they keep going like this, the whole dungeon might be wiped out soon. Finally realizing how much time he spent, Shin asks if Hai remembers the life reversal skill she gave him along with the others, and Hai asks why that's relevant now. It's an emergency skill that converts life force to mana. But there's a problem. In Murim, if your external and internal arts level reach 35, you gain an ethereal body, and when that happens, your stats become limitless. At level 40, you gain the ability to keep your life force in peak condition forever. Combining both and using life reversal along with it, you can effectively pull infinite MP from your life force without any harm. Shin basically found a bug in the game. Hai is nearly speechless. But Shin isn't done. He continues explaining that at higher levels, everything essentially becomes one, and because of that, the things he can do with his hunter powers are limitless. As Hai stands there dumbfounded, Shin leaps into the air to clear the rest of the monsters before taking on the boss. Thinking about Shin's explanation, Hai feels foolish for trying to carry him through the levels and is finally relieved, as the upcoming solar festival looks to be completely under control. Deciding not to waste time, she picks up her dagger, slicing an incoming wyvern to do her part in the dungeon. Several crimson slashes cleave through the monsters with ease, decimating them, while Hai clings to a cliff edge, slightly exhausted from her fight. Wasting no time, she leaps from the edge, jumping from monster to monster, quickly dispatching them before landing on the ground. Looking down, she sees a huge horde of monsters, seemingly endless, still left to be taken care of. The number of monsters in the dungeon is far more than she expected. Thinking about raising the dungeon's level after they leave, Hai considers how future raids on the dungeon should be set up. But out of nowhere, a massive dragon flies above her, its shadow covering the ground completely. Looking at the monster, it's clearly too large to be of the same species. Wondering how two species ended up in the same dungeon, Hai leaps into the air just before the monster's sharp claw can tear her apart. But the dragon is faster than expected. Giving Hai no time to breathe, it appears right in front of her, trying to devour her with its giant mouth as many other smaller monsters swarm her from all sides. Quickly drawing her weapon, Hai prepares to face the giant. The dragon swings its wings, sending multiple slashes in Hai's direction, catching her by surprise. It's a mythic level attack, far more powerful than expected, capable of taking down the entire dungeon system. Hai keeps falling to the ground as the monster approaches, unsure of what to do, when Shin's voice suddenly echoes nearby. With a smile, Shin comments that it's finally time. Confused by Shin's remark, Hai asks if he knows anything about the monster. Catching the falling Hai, Shin explains that the monster is the dungeon boss, and he sensed it with his key ability, which also alerted him to other monsters of different species. As the dragon charges at them, Shin, still holding Hai, says he purposely left the boss for the end, as that's the traditional way to complete a dungeon. He looks at Hai's face, asking why she didn't use her full power, because even if it was really strong, the monster would have been an easy pick for her anyway. But before Hai could reply, he brushed off the topic, commenting that he's hungry and asks if Hai prefers it fried or cooked, which annoys Hai. Dropping her off at the ground, Shin manifested fire and lightning in his hands, standing his ground as the wyverns rushed toward him along with the gigantic dragon. He tells Jihayi to wait this one out and asked her to prepare for a meal because tonight they're having chicken. Jihayi stood there watching as Shin leapt into the air to fight the horde. He blasted through the smaller monsters with his fire and lightning-infused fists. Seeing this, Jihayi shouted to Shin, reminding him of his promise to fight with just magic and not to go full barbarian with the gum-gum pistols. But Shin replied, saying that he was indeed using magic since he was infusing it into his fists, leaving Jihayi speechless. Suddenly, something caught Jihayi's attention in the sky. A huge portal opened out of nowhere, and countless monsters poured out. Shin stayed distracted by the fight, turning his back to the portal while Jihayi screamed for him to get out of there fast. Concerned about what the portal might be, Jihayi charged towards it. As Shin was not responding to any of her words, Jihayi leapt high into the air, setting her sights on Shin, who stood in the middle of a vortex of monsters forming around him. She repeatedly called out, asking if he could hear her, but there was no response. She slashed through the tiny monsters in a straight line, hoping Shin could use the distraction to escape. But the monsters had no intention of letting anyone out. As Jihayi cut down each monster, 10 more took its place. The smaller monsters completely covered Shin, forming a ball around him, slowly closing in for the kill. This behavior was unusual. Standing on the cliff, Jihayi observed the monsters' behavior. From what happened before, it was clear as day. The small monsters aren't moving according to their own will. There's an absolute chain of command with the larger monsters at the center. The proof is that the small monsters blocked attacks meant for the large monsters with their own bodies. It was clear that no matter how many small ones fell, as long as the big dragon was alive, the fight would never end. While Jihayi stood there deciding her next move, she looked up at the massive monster ball forming in the sky, her concern for Shin growing. She remembered that just before he was completely engulfed, it looked like he was calm and had a plan. Still concerned for his safety, she reflected on this strange phenomenon, which had never happened before. No matter how powerful Shin was, he could still be in danger. Thinking of how she could help him, Jihayi spotted one of the smaller monsters flying low near her, sparking an idea. She swiftly jumped onto its back as it flew high into the air, not even noticing her presence. It seemed all the monsters were fixated solely on Shin, and if that was the case, Jihayi could sneak into the swarm. She devised a plan to defeat the mutated monster causing this strange behavior to finally end it. As her attention was momentarily diverted, another small dragon smashed into her, sending her flying towards the ground. Thankfully, she managed to stab onto a wyvern, stopping her fall. The big dragon recognized her as a threat and charged at her at full speed. Seeing this as her best chance, Jihayi jumped toward the dragon, determined to finish it off. Her eyes glowed gold as she activated her ultimate ability, shadow puppetry. A huge slash of mana burst through, killing the giant dragon in one strike. However, the number of minions was too high. Disappointment washed over her face as she thought about how she could possibly kill them all. But suddenly, a blue energy zoomed past her at lightning speed, startling her. She saw Shin standing in the middle of a huge mana orb, glowing with energy. Waves of concentrated mana obliterated every monster they touched. Stunned beyond belief, Jihayi watched as Shin materialized a sword of pure energy without any medium. On top of that, he was using the weapon manipulation technique to control multiple copies of it. She marveled at the power of someone at the level of the ethereal body. Ethereal blades manifested around Shin as he stood in the middle, visibly pissed off. The time for playing hunter was over. Extending his hand, Shin sent countless ethereal blades flying forward, destroying every monster in sight. Within seconds, the monsters disappeared from the sky. Standing on a cliff, Jihayi reflected on the situation. Things went smoothly thanks to Shin being there, but this is a huge problem. What if something like this happens in other dungeons? With the current system of clearing dungeons based on the danger level and assigning the appropriate level of hunters, it's uncertain if they'll be able to respond to gates and mutated monsters appearing out of nowhere. They'll be annihilated without a doubt. While Shin examined the monstones dropped by the monsters, Jihayi thought through the severity of the problem. This took priority over the solar festival. But Tae-hoon wouldn't care. Thoughts of an attack against her during the investigation by Twilight crossed her mind, showering her with fear. Breaking her chain of thought, Shin held a purple moonstone in front of Jihayi's face, asking why it was different from the other monstones he had seen. Looking at the purple stone, Jihayi called it a skill stone, explaining that it was a rare stone only dropped by powerful monsters upon defeat. While Shin processed the information, Jihayi turned to him with a serious face, telling him she had something to ask of him. 1 month later, in the city streets, people discussed the upcoming solar festival. One person mentioned the list of entries for the festival, while another commented about a no-name on the list. That no-name was Shin. They talked about how he had become popular on the internet lately, despite only being a hunter for a month. Nearby, a man in glasses sat on a bench, sweating nervously. He looked up at a giant building, commenting that he was in real trouble this time. Inside a conference room, a man yelled at someone about not being able to gather any information on Shin, who had been selected as Daybreak's relief pitcher. The person in question stood there, taking it all in while continuously apologizing. This was the Twilight Guild headquarters. A person entered the room, addressing the yelling man as Director Park. Hearing the voice, Park's behavior completely changed to a submissive one, addressing the newcomer as Master. It was Park Tae-hoon. He sipped a glass of alcohol and invited the newcomer to sit. Addressing the room, Tae-hoon advised everyone to wait a while to see what Shin was really capable of before taking any action against him. With a sinister grin forming on his face, he commented, "The sprouts of chaos must be eliminated." We see the glasses guy sitting at a table in a cafe with a coffee by his side. He seemed restless as he waited for someone to arrive. Checking his watch, he murmured that it was almost time. Suddenly, spotting someone he recognized, Glasses stood up, waving his hands to grab the person's attention. Gesturing for him to come over, Glasses thanked the man for responding to the sudden invitation he had sent for a meeting. It was none other than our boy, Cha Shin-hyun. Scanning his surroundings, Shin noticed Glasses sweating nervously as he extended his hand, inviting him to take a seat. Calling out to Shin, Glasses tried to grab his attention. Shaking hands with him, Shin asked if he was Kim Cheol from the Twilight Guild, changing his tone and trying hard to sound polite because Eun had asked him to adjust his tone earlier. Sweating, Kim expressed his happiness at meeting Shin, but in his mind, he silently commented on Shin's rude manners. Clearly, the behavioral training hadn't worked. Yet, Kim thought it was better that Shin was showing his true nature since his task was to extract as much information as possible. Shin exposing himself through his behavior played perfectly into Kim's hands. Quickly snapping out of his thoughts, Kim pulled out some files, fumbling awkwardly in his nervousness. Shin observed the clumsy display, questioning if there was even a point to this meeting if everyone in Twilight was as disorganized as Kim. Eventually, Kim managed to pull out a piece of equipment from his bag and placed it on the table. Pointing at it, he explained that it was a magic sound barrier. Upon pressing a button, it would create a membrane blocking outside sounds, making it perfect for secret conversations. Intrigued by the mention of a secret conversation, Shin sat back while Kim's face turned serious, his previous nervousness gone. Kim offered Shin a partnership with the Twilight Guild for the upcoming solar festival. Slumping in his chair, Shin sighed at the offer, thinking how everything was going just as he predicted. He asked Kim if he knew about his cooperation with the Daybreak Guild, to which Kim responded affirmatively. Kim elaborated, revealing that they were aware Shin was fully sponsored by Daybreak and that the vice leader had helped Shin handle Kong by creating a fake retirement story. He also mentioned the frequent dungeon raids conducted by Jihayi and Shin. Kim continued, commenting on how, after all the trouble with Daybreak, instead of being enemies, Shin created a one-man guild to partner with them. Adjusting his glasses, Kim pointed out flaws in Shin's relationship with Daybreak and proposed an alliance with Twilight instead. In return, he promised rewards far greater than those from Daybreak. Looking down at his cup, Shin smiled slightly, realizing he had misjudged Kim. The nerdy guy he thought was a loser turned out to be sharp and thorough in his job. Kim's points were hard to refute, but it didn't matter. Standing from his chair as Kim continued explaining the offer, Shin refused. Turning around, he walked away, telling Kim that he was only curious about what Kim had to say and had no intention of accepting the offer. Panicking, Kim repeated his offer, shouting that he would give anything if Shin dropped out of the sun ritual. Shin, giving him a side-eye, remarked that he was indebted to Jihayi and despised leaving debts unpaid. At this point, Kim was completely losing it, running behind Shin, pleading with him to reconsider. Internally cursing Shin, Kim was practically in tears, begging him to stay. As Shin left, a man seated at one of the nearby tables lowered his mask and called out to Kim, startling him. It was Tae-hoon, the leader of Twilight. Placing a firm hand on Kim's shoulder, Tae-hoon shot him a menacing glare and demanded to know why Kim had failed to drag the conversation as instructed. Through an earpiece in Tae-hoon's ear, it was clear they had been trying to eavesdrop on the conversation. Grabbing Kim's tie, Tae-hoon revealed that Kim had been wired all along. Kim, drenched in sweat, stammered an apology, blaming Shin's rudeness. However, Tae-hoon seemed more focused on discovering Shin's true identity. He had to figure out who this man really was. Elsewhere, we see Jihayi laughing with Shin about the meeting, amused at how upset Tae-hoon must be. Shin smiled, commenting that while Tae-hoon might have guessed he was from Murim, he had no idea he was the Supreme Sword Emperor. Shin revealed that the moment he entered the cafe, he had sensed Tae-hoon's chi. Complimenting Jihayi on accurately predicting Tae-hoon's moves, Shin noted that Tae-hoon seemed like a perfectionist, one who grew anxious at even a slight deviation from his plans. Switching topics, Jihayi updated Shin on the dungeon incident, reporting no new developments. Thanking Shin for investigating the ominous bird dungeon alone, she joked about avoiding the paperwork. However, Shin's response turned colder as he asked if there was anything else left for him to do. Noticing the change, Jihayi cautiously asked if something was wrong. Back with Shin, Eun approached him, asking if he was done talking and reminding him it was time. Lowering his phone, Shin agreed, but internally he regretted coming. They stood before a fancy building, and as Eun touched a glass box holding their parents' ashes, she called out, telling them that Shin had finally returned. Tears fell from her eyes while Shin stood behind her, emotionless. In his mind, Shin cursed his decision to come here. He was no longer the same person he had been back then. Standing before his parents' ashes, not a single tear fell from his eyes. He knew that if Eun saw this inhuman side of him, it would hurt her even more. Still touching the box, Eun turned to Shin, asking if he didn't feel anything at all. She noted that he didn't look sad or even bother touching the ashes. Silent, Shin apologized, telling Eun that he was no longer the brother she remembered. He couldn't give her what she wanted to see. This response sent Eun over the edge. Screaming, she demanded to know how Shin could possibly understand what she wanted. Memories of her brother flooded her mind as she rubbed her eyes, asking why he was so cold, so unlike the person he once was. Finally, accepting that things would never return to how they were, Eun walked past Shin, determined to continue living the way she had before he returned. Shin watched her go, questioning whether coming back into her life had been the right choice. Her question, why he had changed so much, was one he couldn't answer himself. Suddenly, a murim window appeared behind him, asking why he still took the form of a human being. The absurd question sent chills down Shin's spine. Seeing the absurd message displayed on the screen, Shin stared confused at what the system meant. A human? What is that supposed to mean? Seeing Shin's response, it started displaying messages which were borderline threatening Shin to obey its will. But he was not going to back down like before. He stood his ground, demanding to know who this was sitting behind the system giving him orders. Is it perhaps the Sky War God? Shin's sly questioning did not sit well with the system, and it threatened to take away everything from Shin. He still didn't know who this was and why this system was threatening him, but those were fighting words, and now the gloves were off. He vowed to find whoever it was and tear them to pieces for daring to threaten the Sword Emperor. The system accepted the challenge and disappeared. As Shin stood there contemplating what just happened, his mind lingered on the statement the system made. When he thought about the things he loved, there was only one clear picture in his mind. Now standing across the street, Un turned around to see Shin was nowhere behind her. Her eyes still wet, she called him a mean bastard for not even following behind her after all that happened. The scene shifts to a commentator excitedly announcing the beginning of the Sun Festival. The one time every hero in Korea is waiting for every year to be the best among all. His passion stirred as he said every word. Finally, it was time. The whole stadium erupted in cheers for the anticipated moment. The festival, which brought all the hunter societies together as a sign of unity, was also the place where you could see them duke it out. All this felt a little too much for Shin, who was standing in the dressing room preparing for the event. It almost seemed like the World Cup was happening. Sitting beside him was Jihayi, sipping tea. She explained that it was almost similar to a World Cup. For the public, hunters are people who use superpowers to fight like in the movies. Who wouldn't be excited about that? Also, this event was designed to paint a friendly picture of hunters in the eyes of the public. Setting the tea aside, Jihayi asked if he had a fight with Un recently. It was obvious the moment they came in that morning. Asking how Shin messed up this time to make her so mad. Changing the topic suddenly, Shin asked Jihayi to help him find a home in a secluded area, catching her off guard. He explained the incident with the system to Jihayi. Even though it was not certain what the objectives of the system were, there was a high chance that the Sky War God was now after him. The whole thing was still a big mystery, but one thing was certain. If Un is with him, she will be in danger. It was all so sudden for Jihayi. She stood up from the bench, processing what Shin just said. Even if what Shin said was true, that was precisely why he should stay close to his sister. Hearing what Jihayi said, Shin turned to a family portrait on the wall. He was no longer the brother Un-sol needed. She already told him that the brother she knew and hoped to see disappeared a long time ago, so it was better to go back to how it was. A punch came flying to his face from Jihayi. Hearing what Shin said, Jihayi's fist gently hit Shin. Even though she didn't like to meddle in other family affairs, if her brother said those words to her, she would definitely punch him. Seems like he knew less about his sister than Jihayi. But before she could explain, their conversation was cut short by a man informing them that the event was about to start. Jihayi awkwardly left the room, asking Shin to stay there until she was back, leaving a confused Shin behind. Was he getting punished for something? Outside in the arena, the official inauguration of the ceremony was underway. The hosts of the event took center stage. Jeon Jun-ho, the leader of Dawn Guild, and Jang Sung-hyuk, the vice leader of Twilight. The commentator continued his passionate speech, informing everyone how Tae-hun and Jihayi were once part of the same guild. Somebody give this man a raise. On the arena, Tae-hun approached Jihayi, looking to mend old ties. Jihayi, irritated by Tae-hun's obvious cunning behavior, swallowed her annoyance, addressed him with a smile, and asked how it's been, throwing a jab at Tae-hun by mocking the vice leader of Twilight as her fill-in. Calming the vice leader, Tae-hun commented on Jihayi's seemingly recent rookie hunt, vowing to get rid of the new ones she brings just like every other time. claiming to free her from the things holding her back. Even though the tension between them was enough to boil a chicken alive, they wished each other the best of luck before parting. The Great Sun Festival has now begun. Match 5 was underway. The man unleashed a barrage of spear strikes at the blonde girl, who struggled to defend herself. With a final blow, he broke through her defenses and claimed victory. The commentator announced the win for Nam Sangmo of the Twilight Guild. In the gallery, the guild leaders sat watching the matches. Taehoon arrogantly commented on his guildmate's victory, claiming the opponent never stood a chance, even if she managed to drag the fight out a little. Rising from his chair, he demanded she provide better entertainment in the next match before leaving the room. Out in the corridor, the vice leader of Twilight stood waiting. Lifting a dagger, he asked when he should carry out the mission to kill Jihayi. But Taehoon stopped him. Everything had its time. Now was the time to greet Cha Eun-sol. Next on the event list was the Archer Survival Arena. A massive cityscape rose in the middle of the stadium, where the archers of each guild would fight it out. The stadium buzzed with energy as the crowd discussed the contestants and predicted the winner. Eun-sol was considered the most promising, but the recent incident at the Red Wolf dungeon left her with injuries, leaving people uncertain. In the preparation room, guild members muttered about the incident, questioning why Eun-sol was allowed to compete after killing one of her own guildmates. But, as the losers they were, they fell silent when Eun confronted them. Still, the pressure weighed heavily on her. After the incident involving their parents, she hadn't spoken to Shin once. Thinking about it only made her angrier. She was the one who was hurt, so why was Shin avoiding her? Another girl entered the room, informing her that someone was waiting. Her heart leapt. Was it her brother? Finally. But it was none other than Jihayi. Annoyed, Eun asked why she was there, only to hear that Jihayi had come to cheer her on. Though she wanted to come with Shin, she had no idea where he was, and she urged Eun to clear up any misunderstandings with him quickly. Eun grew irritated. Since when did the vice leader take it upon herself to meddle in another family's affairs? But Jihayi brushed it off as her responsibility as Shin's sponsor. That amused Eun. Since the conversation had turned personal, she spoke her mind. To be honest, I don't like you, vice leader. To me, it feels like you're just stringing my brother along to run your errands. She recalled how her brother had joined the Hunters Association immediately after returning from Murim, without even pausing to sort out his own life. This had to be Hei's influence. The more she thought about it, the more her frustration grew. The fact that she now knew nothing about Shin's life made her feel left out and distant from her beloved brother. It was as if he had become an entirely different person, one she sometimes failed to recognize. Tears streamed down Eun's face as she let out her frustration. But time moved on, and the announcement for the Archer Survival Contest blared through the speakers, calling all contestants to the field. Wiping her eyes, Eun apologized to Jihayi for venting and made her way toward the arena. But Jihayi urged her to give Shin some time. He didn't want to change, but the things he had been through weren't something he could just set aside. Eun understood, but knowing and accepting were two different things. For someone who had lived in hell, where a single mistake meant death, the demons he faced had left their mark. Recalling her own experience, Jihayi tried to comfort her. Yet hearing this from someone else made Eun feel that her brother might see her as unreliable. She walked toward the arena while Jihayi stood behind, watching. Perhaps Eun failed to notice, but Jihayi did. Shin had been standing around the corner, listening to the entire conversation. Turning to him, Jihayi asked if he had been worried about his sister all along, even while pretending not to care. Shin merely replied that he was just passing by, which triggered Jihayi. She stormed toward him, grabbed his collar, and screamed, comparing him to Taehoon. She demanded he be honest with his sister. Eun wasn't the little girl from the past anymore. Did he still think she was the innocent child who needed his protection? If he had something to say to her, he should just say it. Jihayi poured her frustration onto Shin. Finally calming down, she asked him to follow her. Back in the arena, gunshots rang out, signaling the beginning of the match. This was the first round of the Archer Survival, and within moments, the 6 teams from Dawn and Twilight would clash. As the match commenced, Taehoon, sitting in the VIP gallery, observed Eun, hoping she would appreciate the little gift he had prepared for her in this game. Soon after the game started, comms began to blare with callouts on enemy locations. Standing on top of a building with her bow and arrow, Eun's mind was busy thinking about the conversation with Jihayi. The feeling of being left out of her brother's life hit her like a truck. She slammed her fist against the wall in frustration, asking why he shared everything with Jihayi but not her. Was it because he still thought she was a kid? She kept complaining about her idiot brother while the match went on around her. One enemy lurked outside the sniping range of her team, trying to catch them off guard. While they were discussing how to deal with him, Eun, who had just snapped out of her thoughts and was ready to pour her anger somewhere, stepped forward, telling everyone that she'd take care of the enemy. She stretched her bow, infusing it with mana as she prepared for an attack. The next moment, the arrow shot through the sky and landed straight on top of the target, who was halfway across the field, eliminating him instantly. Looking at her face, it seemed like that arrow wasn't meant for the enemy, but for her own brother. The scene flashed back to the time her whole family died in the accident. People at the funeral pitied the little girl who lost everything, while Eun sat on the floor in silence. Even though everyone around her assumed her missing brother was dead, she held on to the belief that he was alive somewhere and would show up soon enough. Suddenly, the monitor on the wall turned on by itself, showing a girl with golden hair. She talked about nightmares and demons descending upon Earth, telling humanity to evolve to face them. Confusion flared across the room as everyone watched this bizarre scene unfold. But for Eun, this otherworldly event felt like an assurance that her brother was alive and well. That's how it all started on Earth. After that, Eun unlocked the Hunter trait and attended the Hunter Academy, where her life was anything but smooth sailing. Many tried to bully her for being an orphan, but she fought back against them all. She graduated top of her academy and got scouted by one of the top guilds, Dawn. Her unyielding determination and skill caught Jihayi's eye, and Eun quickly rose through the ranks. Not to everyone's liking, of course, but she pushed forward, waiting for the day her brother would return. Putting the pendant with her family photo aside, she was determined to show her brother how much she had grown, cursing him for always seeing her as a child. But then, something hit her. The surroundings were eerily quiet. Eun went on the radio, informing her team about her plan to relocate to a better spot, but got no response. Suddenly, multiple arrows shot toward her from behind, barely missing. Before she could react, another arrow hit her shoulder, making her scream in pain. The arrows issued for the competition were supposed to be blunt, but this was the real deal. This was way more serious than a game. One of the men who attacked Eun jumped down, telling her not to expect any help since they had jammed all broadcasts and radios in the area. But luckily for Eun, she wasn't someone who relied on aid from others. Pulling the arrow out of her shoulder, she drew 3 of her own arrows at once and aimed at the thugs. The enemies, however, were prepared. A rain of arrows flew toward her, giving her no room to counterattack. Eun jumped, drawing her bow midair, unleashing multiple blue arrows that hit every single one of them, except one guy. The guy, stunned after seeing Eun hit all 3 of his comrades in one shot, froze at her skill. Archers are divided into 3 categories: snipers for long range, shooters for area attacks, and rangers for agility. To face a sniper like Eun, a group of rangers would have been the logical choice, but what he witnessed was beyond explanation. Before Eun could take a breather, the guy leapt into the air and fired his special skill at her. She dodged instantly and struck back, but missed. Or did she? The arrow curved midair and hit the guy from behind, giving him a backshot he'd never forget. That left one person. They stood face to face like an MMA pre-fight stare-down. While Eun was distracted, another guy, who had been hiding the whole time, crawled out of the hole he was in and shot straight at her, catching her off guard. Man, these guys are like cockroaches. Kill one, 2 more crawl out. There was nothing she could do. Is this it? At that moment, a voice rang in her head. It was her brother, asking her to use martial arts. A sudden surge of aura flowed through Eun's body as she caught the incoming arrow with her bare hand. The next moment, She rushed toward the shooter, punching him straight into oblivion. Before Un could have a proper talk with the last guy, her teammates arrived, shooting the last enemy in the head and eliminating him. They must be my solo queue teammates. Really useful when needed. Finally, all the enemies were dealt with. As Un looked up at the helicopter flying above, she silently thanked her brother for the help. Inside the chopper, Shin and Hei were observing everything. Seeing his sister kick ass, Shin felt proud of how much she had grown. But Hei was concerned about Shin asking Un to use martial arts so openly. If Taehoon saw that, it could expose all their secrets. But little did they know, another drone was also observing the entire fight, providing Taehoon with a private feed. Taehoon's eyes widened in surprise as he saw Un use martial arts, even if only for a split second. After some time, everyone moved to the amusement park. There, a girl sat down and said she wanted to know how her brother truly felt about his sister's strength. He thought for a moment and then realized that everything had actually been clear from the start. At the very least, he should have opened the lid, since he had only been pretending to drink. The brunette turned away and said that, in the eyes of the strongest immortal in the universe, the girl still lacked a lot. If not for her martial arts, she would not have made it to the finals at all. Her internal energy was also running out, and in the end, she would have simply lost. However, the girl was surprised when she heard that this was not entirely true. Her brother put the bottle down and said that she was strong thanks to her hard work, both her martial arts and her hunter skills. The brunette lowered his head and apologized for hiding so much from her. He wanted to be her brother like before, but there were some things he couldn't easily explain. He imagined her as a baby and said that, in his mind, she was still the same small and innocent sister from the past. In reality, though, she had grown up and become much more mature. The girl listened quietly and then looked around. She said that for a long time she had wanted to find people she could call family, which was why she became a hunter. She also mentioned the archer, explaining that she thought reaching the highest level might give her at least some kind of clue. Instead, she hadn't even noticed how deeply she had plunged into everything. Lowering her head, she added that it had all seemed surprisingly easy, and that was how she reached this point. After that, she held out her little finger and said that everything was already in the past. She only wanted her brother to promise her one thing, to never leave her again. He replied that this was obvious, but she looked at him from under her brows and said that it wasn't obvious at all. She raised her eyes and admitted that lately she felt as if he was hiding something from her. And because of that, she felt lonely. There was no point in hiding anything anymore. He listened carefully, then smiled, squeezed her little finger with his own, and promised that he would never leave her alone. He also added that there was something else she needed to know. The girl immediately asked in surprise what it was. Her brother smiled and revealed that his nickname was not just Immortal something, but the Immortal Emperor of the Sword. This news shocked her, and she fell completely into a stupor. At that moment, a loudspeaker announced that the great battle would begin in an hour and urged everyone to hurry. Repeating that there was only an hour left, the announcement echoed through the area. Her brother stood up and said that he had to go. She told him to try hard and asked whether he was really serious about going in those clothes, since it was an official event. The guy turned around in surprise and said they were comfortable. He then asked if Alice's sister also thought those guys were strange, as if they were deliberately targeting her. The girl remembered them and said that when dawn and dusk intersect in the dungeon, skirmishes sometimes happen, but this time they openly attacked her, which was truly strange. Smugly, she added that they often met such people and that they probably wanted to quickly get rid of the Dawn Pro. The brother thought that she would definitely kick the pro in the ears. He then reflected that if everything was really like this, then perhaps it was for the best. At the same time, a familiar notification appeared in his mind, telling him that everything would be taken away from him again. After some time, he arrived at the stadium. There, he was greeted by a man who said he had heard a lot about him from the deputy head. The man shook his hand and said that he would be taking on the vanguard in the great battle, adding that he was looking forward to it and was pleased to finally meet him. The man then turned and asked how things were going with the others. While he spoke with the group, The main character discussed with his girlfriend whether this was the same leader they had talked about before. She replied that he shouldn't look down on him, as he was a top-level level 60 hunter. The young man said that no matter what, the man was still weaker than her, and she agreed. The brown-haired man then approached her, said he would be leaving, and wished her successful preparation for the competition. The guy realized that this meant he wouldn't use martial arts during the battle. He smiled and reminded himself that highly developed martial arts were almost indistinguishable from magic. There was also one more thing: he wanted to thank his girlfriend. She listened in surprise when he said that she had managed to make peace with her sister. Smiling, she replied lightly and wished them good luck, and Shin smiled back in response. Finally, fans approached him and asked if he was really the person they had heard so much about from the deputy leader. They said he was incredibly talented and asked him to take care of the vanguard. The group was clearly shocked by him, though Shin barely listened. Deep in thought, he found the situation suspicious. The people who attacked his sister were definitely following someone's orders, and there was only one person who could give such commands. At that moment, that very person appeared, the leader of the Twilight Guild. Smiling, he said that he really had interrupted their break. Shin looked at him through the crowd, his thoughts racing. If the one who sent him the message was a heavenly warrior, then it was entirely possible that this subordinate of the heavenly warrior was also involved. After that, the man stepped closer and asked whether this was not meant to be a friendly encounter, saying that he had only come to greet them. The others replied that everything was already clear, explaining that their guilds were not on such terms. The guild leader smiled, spread his hands, and said that it seemed he had been pretending rather poorly. The guys were right. After hearing that a great figure would be here, he had come to spy on him. He then approached the main character and added that he had heard a lot about him. Smiling, he said it was nice to finally meet and noted that this was their first encounter. The young man looked at him, shook his hand, and confirmed that this was indeed their first meeting. Afterward, he observed the man for a while, thinking that the heavenly harmony of pure art still had not responded. If this wasn't the man's doing, then where had his sister learned martial arts? He remembered her and wondered whether someone who had never been to Myram Master could truly possess such skills. The main character also glanced at the man's assistant and mentioned that he knew one of their workers, adding that they hadn't seen each other in a long time. He tensed slightly when the young man said that earlier he had tried to get closer through the secretary, but the conversation had unfortunately failed. Looking at the man again, he casually added that during the Battle of Archers, his sister had caused a great deal of trouble for the Twilight Hunters. The man replied that he had been about to mention that himself, praising the sister's excellent skills. The main character frowned and warned the guild leader that he would not forget this and that there would be a price to pay. The man answered with a smile, asking whether he should be afraid and saying that he would be looking forward to it. Turning away, the boy told him to wait patiently. He also wondered whether Summer was connected to the heavenly warrior, but first and foremost, he was thinking about how his sister had been involved. As he left, he added that he would arrange an interesting performance, one that would not disappoint. In his thoughts, he was certain that he would erase that guild from the world. The stands erupted in cheers as the commentator announced that the audience had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Everyone listened intently as it was declared that the main event of the Sun Festival was about to begin. A girl stood up and proclaimed that the great battle of dawn and dusk would finally take place today. The crowd around them was filled with anticipation. When the main character entered the battlefield, she announced that the hunter representing the dawn side was a super newbie who had attracted massive attention after personally offering a partnership to the deputy head of the Dawn Guild. The commentators added that he was also the head of the martial arts guild, Hunter Cha Shin-hyun. The girl grabbed her partner and remarked that this was the first time a hunter not belonging to a guild had appeared in the great battle. Who was he, and why was he invited by Dawn? It was unclear. Her colleague added that all information about his level, class, and achievements was hidden, meaning nothing was known about him. This secrecy could have a strong psychological effect on the enemy. He then introduced the opponent, the head of the Twilight Vanguard. A man appeared and remarked that the rumors were true, saying the newcomer really did have an impudent face. The commentators introduced him as a genius mage of the Twilight Guild, fiery charisma, the flame of the fire dragon. Stepping closer, he declared that he would burn his opponent to ashes. Shin grinned, mocking the title and wondering whether the man wasn't at least a little ashamed of such a name. As they stared into each other's eyes, the commentators announced the beginning of the first match of the great battle. The bell rang. The leader of the Twilight Guild smiled, thinking that this man knew exactly what he was doing. There was no way he could be allowed to live. At the very least, all of his abilities had to be revealed. The Twilight subordinates stepped back, remembering that he was the guild head. When they raised their heads again, they were shocked. One of them asked what kind of show this was, as the opponent was flying directly overhead. Even the commentator questioned what was happening. It was clear that the main character had immediately revealed his class and risen high into the air levitation, a skill of the sorcerer class. While the hunter hovered above the battlefield, the girl commented that he was openly revealing his high-class status. Not only that, but he was demonstrating incredible control over magic by maintaining such height. Was this really his strategy? Someone asked whether he had a plan. After thinking for a moment, she replied that it didn't seem so. Perhaps the young man simply wanted to do it. Still hanging in the air, Shin assessed his opponent. He was a level 50 hunter, a wizard, roughly the same level as his previous opponent. Remembering that fight, he thought that if he used martial arts, the enemy wouldn't stand a chance. But if he fought using only hunter skills, the opponent might have an edge now that he was level 53. He lowered his gaze, realizing that although he had gained levels quickly through his power, he lacked experience as a hunter. He also glanced at the guild leader and sensed something else. The man was watching him closely. Smiling, Shin said aloud that he noticed the attention. Did the leader really want to know more about him? Raising his hand higher and activating his power, he declared that the man could watch for 100 years until his eyes dried out, but he would never reveal what he was waiting to see. In an instant, a projectile was launched at his opponent. As the enemy hurried to defend himself, the commentator shouted that countless energy spheres created by the hero were raining down like rays of light. The opponent struggled to block them, erecting a fiery barrier in an attempt to withstand the onslaught. However, it didn't help much. The man on the ground thought that monospheres without attributes were merely a basic class skill. Was his opponent really just testing the waters? He soon returned fire, and the commentators announced that the hunter had finally brandished the burning flame like a whip, attempting to counterattack. The wizard frowned. His opponent was clearly a sorcerer, yet he was obviously hiding something. Among magicians, there were only 3 major paths. The first were artisans, who focused on non-combat activities such as creating skill cubes and items. The second were wizards, specialists in combat who endowed mana with special attributes. The third were sorcerers, embodiments of magical phenomena themselves, closer to beings with supernatural abilities than ordinary mages. They used abilities like teleportation and flight, and usually stayed in the rear during battle, providing support and occasionally exhausting enemies with terrifying hidden techniques. With this image clear in his mind, the wizard stepped forward. Standing back and observing was not his style. He approached the enemy to strike again, activating his fire energy and shouting that if his opponent had a trump card, now was the time to use it. Otherwise, he would be forced to experience his heat firsthand. The main character raised his hands to shield his face, frowning slightly, and then drove himself firmly into the ground. The commentator shouted in astonishment. It was incredible. The man's flames exploded with overwhelming force, just as expected from the flame of the fire dragon. The combination of fire magic and physical strength was magnificent. Everyone was stunned, and the commentators added that this hunter was known for a close combat fighting style, something extremely rare among magicians. Lowering his head, the brunette muttered that he had thought the only such magician came from Miram. He straightened up and added that his opponent's way of thinking was somewhat similar to his own, which irritated him slightly. Nick, who had been listening attentively the entire time, formed another fire sphere and warned him once again. If he didn't want to crawl on the floor, then it was time to fight seriously. Activating his special skill, a massive column of fire surged forward. Shouting that it was time to show everything he had, Pronik unleashed the march of the fire dragon. A gigantic fire dragon rushed toward the main character. Shin smiled, admitting that his opponent had surprised him. Since he had asked for a trump card, he would be given one. He pointed downward, shocking everyone. Blue energy erupted in front of the advancing fire dragon, halting it completely. His opponent stared in disbelief, demanding to know who this insane bastard was. Such a powerful attack had been stopped outright. The commentators were equally stunned, shouting in confusion as they looked at the shattered arena. It was unbelievable that he had survived, let alone neutralized, the fire dragon's assault. The crowd didn't understand what had happened either. Some thought he had been swallowed by the attack, while others were completely lost. Then a massive monster of blue flames appeared above the man's head. With a simple snap of his fingers, he demonstrated flawless control of magic. Nearby, a man turned to Ji and demanded to know what had just happened. Ji stepped away, thinking to herself that almost no one could truly distinguish between his power and magic. He had fooled countless people. Though he claimed not to understand what was happening, she knew he understood everything perfectly. Beside her, the guild leader watched in silence, furious. His protégé stood in the arena, while it was being declared that even the Fire Dragon March was useless against the opponent. That was his ultimate move. Why hadn't it worked? Enraged, the wizard created another projectile and shouted that this bastard should die. Shin calmly raised his hand, forming a shield in a single motion. He asked why his opponent was so agitated and whether he wanted to be shown something as consolation. The wizard leapt backward, flew into the air, then crashed down and ordered him to shut up, smashing the floor beneath his feet. As he launched into close combat, the commentators announced a furious series of attacks. Yet the main character held his ground easily, restraining his opponent without difficulty. One was furious, the other clearly enjoying himself. The commentators exclaimed that this was an incredibly exciting battle. Who could have imagined hand-to-hand combat between two magicians? Finally, the opponent stopped, completely confused. He heard that he had done well, but had made one mistake that spoiled everything. The brunette pressed a point on his leg and explained that he was still too green. His center of gravity should have been in his legs, yet he had foolishly lifted them off the ground. The wizard was sent flying and crashed heavily behind him. The red-haired young man raised his head in disbelief and asked how this had been done. He asked again, stunned. Stepping closer, Shin leaned in and said that he had been studying martial arts for a very long time. Moving even closer, almost face to face, he added that the man simply lacked experience. He asked if he truly understood now, or if he really believed his abilities were enough. His final words struck directly at the wizard's pride, making it clear that his pathetic techniques were far from sufficient, and that he himself was far weaker than he believed. Immediately, the main character was taken aback when he heard that he was now being openly threatened, that even his ashes would remain. The red-haired young man rose to his feet and activated raging flames around himself. The brunette barely managed to leap away as his opponent screamed that, even after exhausting all his strength, he would still burn him to ashes. At once, countless fire dragons appeared again. This time, it was the true release of power. The march of the furious fire dragons surged straight toward its target. Shin stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Then he smiled faintly and said that it seemed he would have to use a little of his real strength, since the opponent before him was genuinely powerful. Flames engulfed the entire arena, and the commentators shouted that the stadium itself was about to be reduced to ashes. Fire dragons flew in every direction, and it looked as though the brunette would finally be forced to struggle just to survive. The girl took a step back, saying that the flames covered the stadium like a massive explosion, and the heat became unbearable. The young man's girlfriend watched intently, wondering how he could possibly counter such a ruthless assault after being driven into a corner. Then something unexpected happened. Before their eyes, Shin blocked the attack with a single motion. It was unbelievable. Such a devastating assault could not even crack his barrier. Standing calmly amid the chaos, the man smiled and remarked that it was irritating, But attacks like this were not particularly difficult to repel. Spreading his hands, he added that as long as his body remained immortal, unaffected by cold or heat, it would not be so easy to deal with him. Even so, the fire dragons continued advancing, setting everything ablaze. Then, in the next instant, a massive explosion erupted and the flames rapidly died down. Lowering his finger once more, the brunette said that such a pathetic attack would never even touch him. He had survived completely unharmed. The commentators exclaimed in shock, saying that he had effortlessly neutralized such a terrifying force. The fire dragons had been erased in an instant. The crowd roared in disbelief, shouting that this level of power was unimaginable. Was his ability truly related to controlling gravity? His opponent collapsed to the ground, muttering that this was nonsense. Raising his head, he stared at the man before him while the commentators argued excitedly. Had magic ever been this powerful before? Even veterans of such battles had never witnessed anything like this. How could someone manipulate gravity so skillfully? Was he really just a beginner? The main character stepped closer and said that the fight had been far more entertaining than he expected. Channeling his energy, he added that it was time to end things. He delivered a powerful blow, sending the red-haired young man flying backward before he crashed heavily to the ground. The brunette smiled and said that now it was truly over. At that moment, the guild leader calmly asked his assistant who would be next. He was told that the knight would enter the field, which made him smile with satisfaction. Sarcastically, he ordered the assistant to inform the next fighter to use everything he had. This was Xiao Jiyoung, the Spear of Twilight, an executioner who erased Dawn's fighters at the very start of battle. Soon, the knight entered the arena. The commentators announced him loudly as the Spear of Twilight, the killer of magicians. One girl excitedly added that judging by his title, he had never lost. Another commented that warrior-type classes generally had a higher victory rate against magicians, though magicians often possessed hidden techniques unknown to others. The main character stood opposite his new opponent, stretched his arms, and said with interest that this must be the famous killer of magicians. He added that he was looking forward to the battle and casually complimented the knight's armor. Watching from above, the guild leader smiled coldly, thinking that the man was far too relaxed. This time, everything would be different. The knight immediately activated his power. The commentator announced the beginning of the second duel of the great battle at the Sun Festival. Buffs surged through the knight's body as he charged forward without hesitation. The girl explained that he had activated every possible enhancement to his physical strength and launched a direct assault from the very start. The knight smiled and asked whether his opponent really intended to break through head-on. It was fast, far faster than expected. The brunette gathered energy, saying he didn't care, and launched a projectile, mocking that the knight looked like an easy target. Magic spheres exploded across the battlefield, yet the knight forced his way through them and closed the distance, shocking everyone. Shin had to jump back instantly to avoid the blow. Raising his head, the young man realized that his opponent was not only fast, but incredibly strong with tremendous willpower. Against such an enemy, aerial combat would be ideal. At that same moment, the knight drove his spear into the ground and activated a skill. With a powerful swing, he leapt toward the main character. The brunette did not expect this. The knight struck again in midair, a devastating jumping attack. The young man barely managed to form a protective barrier, but even that was pierced. An explosion followed. The commentators shouted in amazement, calling the attack incredible. The knight gave no chance to escape into the air and attacked relentlessly. The arena was left in ruins, much to the despair of those responsible for maintaining the rankings. Meanwhile, the main character lay embedded in the ground, dazed and wondering how much time had passed since he had last been struck so brutally. The knight showed no intention of stopping and rushed toward him again. Finally, the young man stood up and muttered that if he were allowed to use martial arts freely, he would finish this opponent in a single second. He added that the bastard was surprisingly stubborn, especially since the opponent was charging at him once again. Raising his hand, his eyes glowing, the brunette said that his opponent probably wanted to see this. He lowered his finger and then something strange happened. The head of the Twilight Guild calmly took a sip of his drink while the commentators exclaimed that the hunter had used an unknown skill again. The knight, who had not stopped attacking since the beginning of the round, suddenly found himself unable to move. The guild leader paused mid-drink when he heard the commentator's genuine shock. The knight began to move again. Somehow, he was resisting the magic and slowly rising to his feet. His eyes glowed as he stared at his opponent. A pillar of magic surrounded him, yet it didn't seem to hinder him at all. It was unbelievable. Despite such overwhelming pressure, the knight continued to advance. Then the main character heard his opponent speak, asking whether he truly believed gravity could stop him. Now it was his turn. The knight charged forward, shouting for him to prepare himself. Shin looked at him in confusion and asked what he was talking about. He waved his hand, trying to recall when he had even used gravity in the first place. Before he could fully grasp it, he was suddenly flung backward at incredible speed and slammed into the wall. The blow drained nearly all his strength. Felt like the final strike. Everyone was stunned, including the head of the guild, who clearly hadn't expected this outcome. The commentators were equally confused, staring at the rankings and shouting that this was the hunter's gravity again. No, something else entirely. This unknown force was powerful enough to crush even the knight. As Shin stood there, they wondered aloud what kind of skill had just been used. The main character approached his opponent and admitted that he was truly strong. It was surprising that he had lasted this long. Slipping his hands into his pockets, he explained that his power was not gravity, but attraction and repulsion. This was his true ability, obtained through sweat and blood. It was called yin-yang conductivity. Information about the skill immediately appeared. It was a legendary treasure so rare that many doubted it even existed. It allowed the user to apply attraction or repulsion to magical power without relying on external magical attributes. He picked up a small pebble and said that if his opponent understood basic physics, he would know that attraction pulls objects together, while repulsion pushes them apart. It was difficult to explain in detail, but the essence should be clear. He threw the pebble forward, closed one eye, and added that he simply applied force in the direction he desired. Before he could finish, he was interrupted. The knight stood up and said that his opponent should never explain his weaknesses. Stretching out his hand, he looked at him mockingly and activated his true skill. The spectators were horrified. At last, it became clear why the knight was known as the killer of magicians. The girl watched in fear, realizing that this knight possessed a terrifying special ability. If her comrade relied only on magic, then this was the end. Indeed, the brunette was suddenly powerless. That outstretched hand felt like a symbol of death. The head of the guild was finally satisfied, declaring that the man would die right there. Ji, however, was terrified and cried out in panic. A status window instantly appeared before the brunette's eyes, stating that a counterspell had been activated and that the use of magic was prohibited for 10 seconds. As the knight raised his spear over him, Shin struggled to understand what was happening. Before the fight, the knight had been instructed to use counterspells by order of the guild leader. The knight himself said that this wasn't a skill he liked to use publicly and questioned why it had come to this. The leader's assistant replied calmly that the leader believed this man was hiding something. A sorcerer with the power of attraction was simply too dangerous and had to be eliminated. Now the main character looked at his opponent and thought that it was truly over. Fear crept in as he asked what this ability was. At that moment, the knight lunged at him with his spear, striking just beside him. He narrowly avoided it. The knight smiled and said that he could see the surprise on his face.